What's up, everybody? AJ here, host of the Madden NFL 12 podcast. And this is an excerpt from this week's podcast, which you can download right now on iTunes. And be sure to subscribe, leave us a comment, and rate it for us. Enjoy. All right, and a lot of people probably curious about how you come up with these ratings. Obviously, you made a lot more changes, but we'll let people see that when we post them. How do you come up with this? Because obviously, some might say, well, how come, a tight end who catches a couple of touchdown passes gets a 10-point upgrade, whereas Ryan Fitzpatrick, who throws 4 touchdown passes and has the highest quarterback rating, only gets 2. How does that work?
Well, a lot of it's obvious, I think, if you sit and think about it. A guy like Scott Chandler, who's never played in the league, or he's been in the league, but he just doesn't produce in the league. He's a blocking tight end. He's got 1 career catch heading into Sunday in the 2011 season. So he's got low expectations. He starts off at a 63. Ryan Fitzpatrick, he's a good quarterback. He's a guy that the Bills like a lot. They re-signed him. He's their number 1 guy. He has a good track record. He comes in at 81 to start the year in Madden. So it's not like we didn't know about Fitzpatrick. He has higher expectations than a guy like Scott Chandler. So it's all about, once you get up to the Troy Polamalu range, Polamalu still produced, had 5, 6, 7 tackles, wasn't terrible in coverage, but the very fact that he's a 99, he's got higher expectations than everybody else. He needs to perform at an elite level, and if you don't, we're going to show, he's going down a little bit. He's not at the peak of his game, and the minute he starts playing up to his perceived ability, we will bump him up or down, however the case.
Yeah, so Donnie, just to give you a hypothetical here, being a Browns fan, it's clear that I need help at wide receiver, especially in Madden. My guys aren't the best overall. So I say to you, what exactly does one of my receivers, let's use Greg Little, what does Greg Little need to do this week for me to get like a 5-point boost overall? What would you be looking for?
For a guy like Greg Little, came in as a 2nd, 3rd round draft pick, so he's got some expectations associated with him. I think he's the 3rd receiver right now, or he's certainly in the mix to maybe be their number 1. If he goes for 5, 6 catches, 150 yards, and a score, that would get him up in the 5-point level for sure. I mean, if he goes crazier than that, you might be looking at 6, 7, 8 points. But already, like Greg Little versus a guy like maybe Jordan Norwood on the Browns. Norwood, he's an afterthought. If he did that, he would go up much more significantly because he's low to start with. Greg Little, already decent. He'd go up, but not as much.
What about guys who maybe, they have high expectations, but you could probably perceive that they just had a bad week? There are guys, let's talk about Lance Kendricks. The guy has pretty good expectations. I think everybody was talking about before the season started. He had 3 touchdowns in the preseason, but he dropped a touchdown pass. His stats would have been better had he caught that pass. How do you judge whether or not to drop a guy drastically after 1 game
versus 2 or versus 3? Sure.
Right.
A lot of that's just, a guy like Kendricks comes into the league as a great pass receiving tight end. Yes, he did have some drops, but we can't just say, oh, you know what? He's not a good pass catching tight end.
Right.
Let's dump his hands by 15 points just to make sure that the one bad week is simulated. But it's when the guys that actually sort of break through those perceptions, like a Scott Chandler, who's a blocking tight end, all of a sudden becomes this fantasy weapon with 2 touchdowns, 60 yards as a guy in the Buffalo passing offense. That's when we have to start really looking at the ratings and readjusting.
So, Donnie, just real quick, if you could, clarify to everybody here, we've talked about this numerous times about the importance of the weekly roster updates, but can you give some insight to how you break it down? We talked about the quarterly and everything like that, when those big moments you were talking about after week 4 and week 8, like having a body of work and what you're looking for?
Sure. That what you're speaking to is sort of what Justin or what Andrew was talking about with the is it 1 game or is it 2 games? After we get those sort of halfway points or those quarterly points, we can sort of take a look at like all 4 weeks or all 8 weeks or the whole season, and then really say, okay, you know what, we need to readjust again based on this bigger collection of work. But we also do it on a per game basis, not as much, not as frequently, and you won't see as big a jumps, but we do both versions of the rating.
And while we're at it, one last thing here, can you talk about the fact that not this week, but soon we're going to start adding in the hot and cold streaks and how you expect that to impact the game?
Yeah, I mean, those are really cool. It's a new feature that the team added this year, all of our new traits and tendencies. We have a hot, cold streak sort of tag this year where I can label a player on a hot or cold streak. Doesn't affect any of his, I don't have to change any of his individual rating numbers, but the hot and cold streak will actually in-game start impacting his numbers and the players around him. So, look for a guy like Cam Newton. If he has another 300-yard passing game this week and next, he's going to be on a hot streak, no doubt.
That was just an excerpt from this week's Madden NFL 12 podcast. Be sure to subscribe and download the full version, which is totally free on iTunes.
Bye.